So let us commence the discussion. Let's commence with the discussion. So our discussion for the day. Okay, welcome. First of all, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the workshop. And today's discussion is a continuation of last week's discussion. So the day today being the 14th day of November, the year being 2021, and the time is 8:02 a.m. East African time. So as I was saying, today's discussion is a continuation of last week's conversation, which was, and the running theme is to be or not to be an engineer. So last week we had Engineer Howard as a guest. We also had Abdi Fati. We also had Dolo as guests, and the focus areas were: is it worth registering as a graduate engineer with the EBK, and is it worth pursuing what you call an engineering degree at the tertiary level? The general consensus in the last discussion was yes, and the guests justified their reasons. So today we build up on what was there last week, and now we focus on licensed practitioners, licensed engineers. When I say licensed, I mean professional engineers and consulting engineers, and then we also have the other class of accredited checkers, which we look at, but not today. So today we have our guests. We have two guests who are both licensed engineers. We have Engineer Shama Kiteme, who is a civil engineer, a licensed consulting engineer. He will introduce himself. And then we also have Engineer Moshe Ojanga, who is a registered professional engineer with the EBK. So we have licensed engineers from the two classes as guests today. Okay, before the guests get to introduce themselves, we'd like to take this opportunity to congratulate one of our guests in the last conversation of the fact for being feted by the IEK, the Excellence Award in the just concluded 28th IEK conference. So, Engineer Shama, being the senior most amongst us, kindly, could you introduce yourself? Tell us more a little bit about who you are, Engineer Shama. Okay, Engineer Shama is still, as he prepares to introduce himself, I think we can move to you, Engineer Moshe.
Yes, you can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay. My name is Engineer Moshe Ojanga. I am a licensed mechatronic engineer.
Yes.
My engineering journey actually started in high school, where I started by doing power mechanics as an elective unit. Back in high school, when we were doing I think 10 units, and one of the elective units was others had the opportunity of doing agriculture, some had the opportunity of doing electrical, others had the opportunity of doing aviation. I actually chose to do power mechanics. So that is where my journey on engineering started. After that, I joined JQuat. In JQuat, I went to do mechatronics engineering. Back then, I had the opportunity of either doing mechatronics or telecommunication and information engineering, but my passion was in automation. So I picked mechatronics engineering, and after that, after I graduated, I got the opportunity to work in Umia Sugar. That is where I started my journey. I registered as an engineer. That was back in 2011. I would also like to thank my mentors in Umia Sugar, because that is where I gained majority of my engineering experience. I got the opportunity to be mentored by Engineer Josephat Asira. and the late engineer Patrick Shilisi. So that is how my engineering journey has gone about. So after Mumias, I came to Nairobi. I worked for a company called East Africa Cables, and I grew, and last year I left work and I started my own farm, and I started practicing as an engineer.
Okay. So
that
okay,
is a brief description of my engineering journey.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Engineer Moshe. For those who may not be aware, Engineer Moshe was also a mentor to me. He's a good friend of mine, and really helped me through this particular journey. So, Engineer Sham, are you back online? Are you with us?
Yes, I was having connection challenges, and I had to work on that first.
Okay.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yes. Kindly just a brief introduction of yourself, Engineer.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
My name is Engineer Shama Kiteme, and I'm privileged to be here this morning. Always a joy to have these engagements. Now, I'm a civil structural engineer. Practice after graduation, I practiced with a contractor. I worked with a contractor, that is, and then I shifted to work with a consulting firm. And then I was later employed by a hospital before I quit employment and began a practice.
Yes.
And so I have kind of worked across the contractors, seeing contractors' perspective, consultants' perspective, and clients' perspective. I, of course, got registered in the process of work. And I've also, as a professional engineer, and I've also of late been registered as a consulting engineer. So I am very interested, of course, in structural design. I do a bit of wastewater, and of course, all the civil works that are tended to building works. I'm involved in doing that. Stormwater containment, and something like that. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, so if our drainage systems in Nairobi have a problem, the person who should be looking for consulting, the experience in stormwater works and the like.
That is not a complicated area for us to work in. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Engineer Sharma. So, okay, so we can, before we proceed, for all the participants who are present, if you have any inquiries, questions that you'd like to be addressed during the course of the discussion, just have them there in the chat. And then at the tail end of the discussion, Engineer Sharma and Engineer Moshe will also try and address the questions. So we proceed with the discussion now. We start with Engineer Moshe, who is a professional engineer. So, Engineer Moshe, in your own view, having a PE, a licensed PE for some time now, is it worth practicing? Is there value in being a PE?
There's value in being a PE.
Yes.
Maybe I can say there's a yes and no, and I'll go further to describe them.
Yes.
There's value in being a PE in that the first one is the public is assured that the health, safety, and the welfare of the project that you're carrying out is accounted for. We've seen lately in the country, we've seen accidents in projects which could have been avoided if some basic engineering practices were carried out. I'll give you two examples.
Yes.
There was one where there was a collapse of a structure,
Yes.
And the people were, when the structure collapsed, it collapsed on individuals. If you look at it, if you look at it keenly, you will see that there was, if you do a root cause analysis of what transpired, you'll find out that there was lack of safety mechanisms. Basically, a safety mechanism like lockout, tagout. You'll find that you get to see that there were no safety practices being carried out on that side. So because there were no lockout or tagouts, everyone was working on the site when engineering activities were taking place. And because of that, when the structure was being brought down, there were people who were where they were not supposed to be. And if a lockout tagout mechanism was in place, this would have been averted. The second one, there was one of the milk factories where somebody was cleaning a boiler and accidentally somebody opened one of the valves and hot milk entered into the boiler, and this person who was cleaning the boiler got to drown and get burnt by the milk. So you find that if there were simple safety mechanisms, this would have been avoided. Then another reason why it is worth it to practice as a licensed engineer is it ensures a level of technical competence above and beyond the engineering degree. Another reason why you should practice as a licensed engineer is there's continuous improvement in the engineering practice. In fact, you can't renew your license if you don't attain a certain CPD point. So this continuous professional development as a licensed engineer. Then another reason why you should practice as a licensed engineer is that it demonstrates that you have accomplished a recognized standard of technical competency and professionalism. We know that there are standards that you need to attain and achieve before you are registered as a professional engineer. So having been a professional engineer, it demonstrates that you attain these standards. Then also being a PE increases your marketability. It sets you apart from the other professionals in the field who are not licensed. Then it also establishes a personal and portable credentials that you can keep throughout your career. Once you're registered as a PE, you can keep it, and there is no retirement from being a PE. You can be a PE for as long as you want, but it is also good to transition to. It is also good to transition into a professional engineer. Then it also promotes engineering as a profession. As a PE, you become a role model to individuals. I got the opportunity to be modeled by engineer Patrick Shigisia and Joseph Patasira, who ensured that I acquired the requisite knowledge that will enable me to transition from a GE to a PE. Then also practicing as a licensed engineer, it ensures that licensure is required for some positions, and it can be a significant asset for promotions and job security. We've recently heard about the tussle at the road agencies. So if you want to grow in your career, you need to have licensure, which will ensure that you grow. Then there's also flexibility. Once you're a PE, you're flexible enough, you can work in industry, in consulting, in private practice, and even in government. And also, and lastly, as a practicing licensed engineer, it makes sure that you have an increased level of responsibility, in that you are accountable for your actions and works as an engineer. So that is on the yes aspect of why it is worth practicing as a licensed engineer. On the no aspect, the public is not aware of the need to have professional engineers. You see, that is the worst bit of it. You might try to get a license as a professional engineer, but the public is not aware. So this needs to be improved. The public needs to be made aware that that certain services need to be carried out by professional engineers. Then there's also a lack of regulation of engineering practice in firms. I know there is regulation of consulting firms, but there is no regulation of practicing engineering firms. So you find that many engineers, many professional engineers would like to open firms and gain an advantage out of the firms they open, but that advantage cannot be capitalized on because these firms are not recognized by Engineering Board of Kenya. I know they're regulated by other bodies like NCA and EPRA, but we would like to have it regulated by the board, by the registration board. But I guess the EBK right now is looking into it under the able leadership of Engineer Margaret Ogai. Then the Engineers Act of 2011 is more punitive than supportive of the engineering practice. If you look at it, it outlines more punishments on the engineering practices than how it will support the engineering practice. Then finally, why it might not be worth it to practice as a licensed engineer in Kenya. There's lack of protection of local content. And this has led to encroachment of foreign professionals in the field to the detriment of the Kenyan engineer. So that is my take on if it is worth it to practice as a licensed engineer.
Okay, so for you, it's a mixed bag. So yes and no, it depends. So and we get to engineer. We are also the same. We find ourselves in most of the same situation as you.
Yes, sir.
But now let us look at the perspective of Engineer Shamba. Engineer Shamba, who is a consulting engineer, and just give us just a little bit because your main focus will be on why it is worth or not worth being a consulting engineer. What's your take, Engineer Shamba?
Okay, so of course, the question is it worth practicing as a professional engineer in Kenya? And
yes,
for me, it's really a yes, a big yes. And I will tell you why. Civil structural engineers are involved in submission of drawings and stuff. For example, when you do a design for a building, you're supposed to submit to the counties for the projects to be approved. Now, when I did not have a license and I needed to do that, I could only do that through a registered professional engineer who has a license, obviously. And so for me, when you graduate and move from that class of graduate to a professional engineer, really, you have more opportunities. You can submit your drawings and plans for approval, which you will not do if you are not registered. And regulatory environment is changing so that increasingly, if you are not registered, you will continuously be locked out of opportunities, locked out of opportunities that are available, because society is increasingly getting aware on the need to engage registered and licensed professionals. You're going to start to see looking for registered professionals. Now, I do admit that the current environment is not as in terms of the space, welfare for engineers, and even how to make a little cash here and there. But let me remind you that the 90s were terrible for engineers, especially after the 1992 elections, when the environment went down, it was very difficult time for engineers. Now, did it last forever? No. In the 2000s, after the NAC government came into power, there was a certain explosion and burst in infrastructure projects. And the few engineers who are registered, it was good for them to plunge in. And then now, because of the activity of 2002 afterwards, there are more projects. The main problem in the 90s is that because of the bad economic situation, you would find like the entire country, there are only 4 roads projects going on. And so for earning a living for engineers were very few. And even training engineers for registration, the opportunities were even few. And so the few registered engineers had a good time. And then because of now increased number of projects, there could be more training for engineers. So yes, and I'm looking at a future where this difficult environment will not last. I am sure that situation is going to change and more registered engineers are going to be required. And then if you're not registered, obviously you'll start from having to fight for registration and all that. So the regulatory environment is changing. The society is getting more and more increasingly aware of safety in constructions. And so they are going to increasingly demand people with correct papers so that they can be held more accountable. And don't forget, the outreach publicity is also increasing from our own selves as engineers by saying don't engage engineers who are not registered and all that. So the public is going to increasingly become aware, and there is going to be more and more pressure to have only engineers who are registered to practice in Kenya. And I can bet the pecuniary aspect will not last long before it starts showing in our bank account. So for me, yes, it is worth it. Practicing as a professional engineer in Kenya. Do not target remaining, in the profession not registered, because it is going to work against you in the long run. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Engineer Sharma. So just since you're here and we can just proceed to the next part. So in your own view, now you've talked about professional engineers, but now you are a consulting engineer. There's a reason why you sought to upgrade your status to the class of consulting engineer, Sharma. So could you tell us why you did that? I mean, for some of us who are professional engineers, why would we look up to you or pursue or follow your footsteps into upgrading our status to the class of consulting engineers?
Yeah, so my main interest to graduate as a consulting engineer is because I have an interest and ambition to have a full registered consulting firm. And one of the requirements in the Engineers Act is that the main or the principal has to be a registered consulting engineer. And the main shareholder and others could be professional engineers. But that is one of the key requirements. So for me, I needed that. Because then again, I also know the regulatory environment is fast changing. You're going to increasingly be required, if you're running a consulting firm, to be a registered consulting engineer. And so that informed my decision. Besides the fact that you also acquire more responsibility, you appreciate that if you are to be a reviewer or to be a panelist with Engineers Board of Kenya, they also expect you to be a consulting engineer. So increasingly, it shows you are an authority in your area because you become a consulting engineer on a certain line. As a PE, you can submit a project in a certain line, but now when you are registered in a water engineer,
Yes.
you actually apply to register in a specialized category, not just
I think
consulting firm registered in Engineers Board of Kenya. Engineer, can you hear me?
Yes,
You can hear me, engineer?
Yes, but you seem to be. Yes. I can hear you, engineer.
Sorry for that. I had changed my network. I was, because I was having challenges. So I'm saying that my pursuit to register as a consulting engineer is from those bases. And of course, currently the board has not put a framework of registering approved checkers, which is now the highest category. So currently, consulting engineering registration status is still a higher cadre than a professional engineer. And so, yeah, those are the real reasons. And I can tell you also, in some government entities, they still require that registration as a consulting engineer. I saw even when you're trying to pre-qualify in some of the counties, they want your registration number as a consulting engineer. So yeah, I'm aware that is, it also gives you more opportunities and more responsibilities. So that really is what informed me for the need to upgrade. And of course, I've acquired the experience and training that I need post-registration as a PE. Yeah, so that is my general thinking. I think there is a plus for you to register as a consulting engineer. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, engineer. Engineer Moshe, in just a minute or two, would you consider upgrading your class to a class of consulting engineer? If you would, why would you consider that? Briefly, just 3 minutes max.
Okay, I will definitely consider upgrading to the class of consulting engineer because it's a demonstrable expertise and leadership. It shows you have leadership in planning, design, modification, rehabilitation of public and private infrastructure. Then, as a catalyst in problem-solving processes, consulting engineers lead teams of multidisciplinary professionals in complex technical projects. So that will also be a plus. Then, as a consulting engineer, you're at the almost at the apex of engineering. So you serve as an expert advisor. Though this role is not keenly placed in the Kenyan environment, we have seen that the president has advisors on issues, say mental issues. The president has an advisor for that. But we are not seeing advisors, expert advisors in terms of engineering. We'd like to see advisory positions for consulting engineers to the county and national governments, and even the private sectors, because what I'm seeing in the environment currently is that the consulting engineers are not being given that opportunity to give their expert advice to the national and county governments. So we'd like to see more roles for consulting engineers to give their expert opinions. Then finally, one of the main reasons I like to upgrade to the class of consulting engineer is the ability to register an engineering consulting firm. But this also brings back the point that I raised earlier, that there is need of EBK to regulate practicing engineering firms, because once they start regulation of practicing
Okay. Engineer.
Farms, the practicing engineering.
Okay, we seem to be losing you, Engineer Moshe.
Engineer Namano.
Okay. I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. So, unfortunately, run out of time. I think I think we'll have to take to do a last session next week on this one. I think we'll have a longer session, say about 2 hours or so. I think hour and the like, just so we can wrap up this particular discussion in say 2 or so hours. I believe that should be okay for all of us, because
Absolutely.
yeah, and also a graduate engineer, maybe a lady engineer, who are very hard to find, but we'll work around that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I believe most of us are gentlemen here. We have to call it a day. We have to end the conversation here, unfortunately. But thank you very much for the insights, especially from Engineer Shama and Moshe Ojanga. Thank you very much for the discussion. So for those who are here with us, kindly reserve your questions for the next session, the last session, which will be next week, same time. Thank you, and all of us stay blessed. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Namano.
Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Namano. Thank you, Engineer Shama. You guys have a very lovely Sunday.
So, thank you.